there is a physical and astral and superastral universe in the three chief divisions of the Kabbalah, as there are terrestrial, superterrestrial, and spiritual beings. The seven planetary spirits may be ridiculed by scientists to their heart's content, yet the need of intelligent ruling and guiding forces is such much felt to this day that scientific men and specialists who will not hear of occultism or of ancient systems find themselves obliged to generate in their inner consciousness some kind of semi-mystical system. Metcalfe's Sun Force theory and that of Salinsky, a learned Pole, which made electricity the universal force and placed it storehouse in the sun. La gravitation pour l'électricité, quoted by de Merville, were revivals of the Kabbalistic teachings. Salinsky tried to prove that electricity producing the most powerful, attractive, calorific, and luminous effects was present in the physical constitution of the sun and explains its peculiarities. This is very near the occult teaching. It is only by admitting that gaseous nature of the sun reflector and the powerful magnetism and electricity of the solar attraction and repulsion that one can explain the evident absence of any wasted power and luminosity in the sun, inexplicable by the ordinary laws of combustion and the behavior of the planets, so often contradicting every accepted rule of weight and gravity. And Salinsky makes this solar electricity differ from anything known on Earth. Father Saki may be suspected of having sought to introduce forces of quite a new order and quite foreign to gravitation which he had discovered in space, in order to reconcile astronomy with theological astronomy. But Nagy, a member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, was no clerical, and yet he develops a theory on the necessity of intelligent forces whose complacency would lend itself to all the whims of the comets. He suspects that, notwithstanding all the actual researches on the rapidity of light, that dazzling product of unknown force, which we see too frequently to understand that light is motionless in reality. C.E. Love, the well-known railway builder and engineer in France, tired of blind forces, made all then imponderable agents, now called forces, subordinates of electricity, and declares the latter to be an intelligence, albeit molecular in nature and material, essayant sur l'identité des agents producteurs du son, de la lumière. In the Alphonse's opinion, these forces are atomistic agents, endowed with intelligence, spontaneous will, and motion, and he thus, like the Kabbalists, make the causal forces substantial, while the forces that act on this plane are only the effects of the former, as with him matter is eternal, and the gods also. Summarized from Ibid, Merville, so it is the soul likewise, though it has inherent in itself a still higher soul, spirit, pre-existent, endowed with memory, and superior to electric force. The latter is subservient to the higher souls, those superior souls forcing it to act according to the eternal laws. The concept is rather hazy, but is evidently on the occult lines. Moreover, the system proposed is entirely pantheistic and is worked out in a purely scientific volume. Monotheists and Roman Catholics fall full of it, of course, but one who believes in the planetary spirits and who endows nature with living intelligences must always expect this. In this connection, however, it is curious that after the moderns have so laughed at the ignorance of the ancients, who knowing only of 7 planets, yet having an octodot which did not include the earth, invented therefore 7 spirits. to fit in with the number. Vavinet should have vindicated the superstition unconsciously to himself. In the Revue des Mondes, this eminent French astronomer writes, "The place of Neptune. The octode of the ancients included the Earth, which is an error, for instance, 8 or 7 according to whether or not the Earth was comprised in the number." Melville assures his readers that Vavinet was telling me but a few days ago that we had in reality only 8 big planets, including the Earth and so many small ones between Mars and Jupiter. Herschel, offering to call all those beyond the 7 primary planets asteroids, la Terre est notre système solaire. There is a problem to be solved in this connection. How do astronomers know that Neptune is a planet, or even that it's a body belonging to our system? Being found on the very confines of our planetary world, so-called the later was arbitrarily expanded to receive it. But what really mathematical and infallible proof have astronomers that it is a planet, and one of our planets? None at all. It is such an immeasurable distance from us. The apparent diameter of the Sun being to Neptune but 1/40th of the Sun's apparent diameter to us, and it is so dim and hazy when seen through the best telescope that it looks like an astronomical romance to call it one of our planets. Neptunus's heat and light are reduced to 1/900th part of the heat of light received by the Earth. His motion and that of his satellites have always looked suspicious. They do not agree, in appearance at least, with those of the other planets. His system is retrograde, etc., but even the later abnormal fact resulted only in the creation of new hypotheses by our astronomers, who forthwith suggested a probable overturn of Neptune. His collision with another body, etc., was Adam's and Leverrier's discovery so welcome because Neptune was as necessary as was ether to throw a new glory upon astronomical provision, upon the certitude of modern scientific data, and principally upon the power of mathematical analysis. It would so appear a new planet that widens our planetary domain by more than 400 million leagues is worthy of annexation. Yet, as in the case of terrestrial annexation, scientific authority may be proved right only because it has might. Neptunus's motion happens to be dimly perceived. Eureka! It is a planet. A mere motion, however, proves very little. It is now an ascertained fact in astronomy that there are no absolutely fixed stars in nature. If, as Sir Herschel thought, the so-called fixed stars have resulted from an owe their origin to nebular combustion, they cannot be fixed any more than is our Sun, which was believed to be motionless and is now found to rotate around its axis every 25 days, as the fixed stars nearest to the Sun. However, it is 8,000 times farther away from him, that is Neptune. The illusions furnished by the telescopes must be also 8,000 times as great. We will therefore leave the question at rest, repeating only what Murray said in his work, La Terre et l'Homme, published in 1858. It is utterly impossible so far to decide anything concerning Neptune's constitution, analogy alone authorizing us to ascribe to him a rotary motion like that of other planets, even though such stars should continue to exist in astronomical parlance while they have passed from the scientific imagination. However, has a strange theory of its own with regard to Neptune, says that if several hypotheses resting on mere assumption, which have been accepted only because they have been taught by eminent men of learning, are taken away from the science of modern astronomy, to which they serve as props, then even the presumably universal law of gravitation will be found to be contrary to the most ordinary truths of mechanics. And really, one can hardly blame Christians foremost of all the Roman Catholics. However, scientific some of these may themselves be for refusing to quarrel with their church for the sake of scientific beliefs, nor can we even blame them for accepting in the secrecy of their hearts, as some of them do, the theological virtues and arcans of darkness instead of all the blind forces offered them by science. Never can be their intervention of any sort in the marshalling and the regular procession of the celestial bodies. The law of gravitation is the law of laws. Whoever witnessed a stone rising in the air against a gravitation, the permanence of the universal law is shown in the behavior of the sidereal worlds and globes, eternally faithful to their primitive orbits, never wandering beyond their respective paths, nor is there any intervention needed, as it could only be disastrous. Whether the first sidereal incipient rotation took place owing to an intercosmic change, or to the spontaneous development of latent primordial forces, or again whether the impulse was given once for all by God or gods, it does not make the slightest difference. All this stage of cosmic evolution, not intervention, superior or inferior, is admissible. Were any to take place, the universal clock work would stop, and cosmos would fall into pieces. Such are stray sentences, pearls of wisdom, fallen from time to time from scientific lips, and now chosen at random to illustrate a query. We lift our diminished heads and look heavenward. Such seems to be the fact. Worlds, suns, and stars, the shining myriads of the heavenly hosts, remind the poet of an infinite, shoreless ocean, whereon move swiftly numberless squadrons of ships, millions upon millions of cruisers, large and small, crossing each other, whirling and gyrating in every direction. And science teaches us that they be without rudder or compass, or any beacon to guide them, they are nevertheless secure from collision, almost secure at any rate, saving chance accidents, as the whole celestial machine is built upon and guided by an immutable, albeit blind, law and by constant and accelerating force of forces. Self-generation ex nihilo, built upon by whom? By self-evolution, is the answer. Moreover, as dynamics teach that a body in motion tends to continue in the same state of relative rest or motion unless acted upon by some external force. This force has to be regarded as self-generated, even if not eternal, since this would amount to the recognition of perpetual motion, and so well self-calculated and self-adjusted as to last from the beginning to the end of cosmos. But self-generation has still to generate from something, generation ex nihilo, being as contrary to reason as it is to the science, thus contrary to reason as it is to science. Thus we are placed once more between the horns motion or in self-generation ex nihilo, as in neither who or what is that something which first produced that force, or those forces. There are such things in mechanics as superior levels, which give them impulse and act upon secondary or inferior levels. The former, however, need an impulse and occasional renovation, otherwise they would themselves very soon stop and fall back into the original status. What is the external force which puts and retains them in motion? another dilemma. As to the law of cosmical non-intervention, it could be justified only in one case, namely, if the celestial mechanism were perfect, but it is not. The so-called unalterable motions of celestial bodies alter and change incessantly. They are very often disturbed, and the wheels of even the sidereal locomotive itself occasionally jump off their invisible rails, as may be easily proved. Otherwise, why should Laplace speak of a probable occurrence at some future time of an out-and-out reform in the arrangement of the planets? Or Lagrange maintain in the gradual narrowing of the orbits, or our modern astronomers again declare that the fuel in the sun is slowly disappearing. If laws and forces which govern the behavior of the celestial bodies are immutable, such modifications and wearing out of substance or fuel, of force and fluids would be impossible, yet they are not denied. Therefore, one has to suppose that such modifications will have to rely upon the laws of forces, which will have to self-regenerate themselves once more on such occasions, thus producing an astral antinomy and a kind of physical polynomy, since, as Laplace says, one would then see fluids disobeying themselves and reacting in a way contrary to all their attributes and properties. Newton felt very uncomfortable about the moon. Her behavior in progressively narrowing the circumference of her orbit around the Earth made him nervous, lest it should end one day in our satellite falling upon the Earth. The world, he confessed, needed repairing, and that very often. See the passage quoted by Herschel. He speaks of real and quite considerable deviations besides those which are only apparent, but get some consolation from his conviction that somebody or something will probably see two things. We may be answered that the personal beliefs of some pious astronomers, however great they may be as scientific characters, are no proof of the actual existence and presence in space of intelligent supramundane beings, of either gods or angels. It is the behavior of the stars and planets themselves that has to be analyzed, and inferences must be drawn therefrom. Renan asserts that nothing that we know of the sidereal bodies warrants the idea of the presence of any intelligence, whether internal or external, to them. Let us see, say Renaud, if this is a fact, or only one more empty scientific assumption. The orbits traversed by the planets are far from being immutable. They are, on the contrary, subject to perpetual mutation in position, as in form, elongations, contractions, and orbital widenings, oscillations from right to left, slackening and quickening of speed, and all this on a plane which seems to vacillate, tel essier. As is very pertinently observed by de Monsieur, here is a path having little of the mathematical and mechanical precision claimed for it. For we know, or no clock, which having gone slow for several minutes, should catch up the right time of itself, and without the turn of a key. So much for blind law and force. As for the physical impossibility, a miracle indeed in the sight of science, of a stone raised in the air against the law of gravitation. This is what Vavinet, the deadliest enemy and opponent of the phenomena of levitation, cited by Arago, says, are the angels and stars. Everyone knows that theory of bolides, meteors, and aeroliths. In connection, an immense aerolith was seen, a mass of 1,800 feet in diameter, bombarding a whole American zone and returning to the spot in midair from which it had started. ovo diárago. Thus, we find in both of the cases above cited that all self-correcting planets and meteors of a gigantic size flying back into the air on a blind force, regulating and resisting the natural tendencies of blind matter, and even occasionally repairing its mistakes and correcting its failures. This is far more miraculous and even extravagant. One would say that any angel-guided element. Bold is he who laughs at the idea of von Haller, who declares that the stars are perhaps an abode of glorious spirits. As her vice reigns, there is virtue master. The stern sind weit its seat.